The Ex-Worker.
An audio strike against a monotone world.
A twice-monthly podcast of anarchist ideas and action.
For everyone who dreams of a life off the clock.
Welcome back to The Ex-Worker. Last summer, we produced a special episode on the Brazilian uprisings against the transit fare increases that spread into a nationwide rebellion. 1 year later, Brazilians are once again engaged in mass protests and resistance, this time focused against the World Cup. So in our 25th episode, we'll share a recently published interview with Brazilian comrades discussing the anti-cup resistance and its context, as well as a short essay about the role of the World Cup and mass sporting events in upholding capitalism and the spectacle. And now it's time to share a piece of the CrimethInc Contradictionary. This episode is brought to you by Hooliganism and Global Village.
Hooliganism. Football was extremely popular in Egypt under the dictatorship. Mubarak himself encouraged this as a way to build national spirit and channel attention away from his repressive regime. Because dissenting political organizations were prohibitive, intrepid young Egyptians flowed into networks of ultras, fanatical football enthusiasts. During games, these apolitical groups engaged in increasingly open conflict with the police. When the revolution broke out in January 2011, they were at the front of the clashes, and their songs and cultural signifiers spread far and wide along with the street fighting tactics they had developed. And the ferment of social upheaval, energy sublimated into vicarious pursuits, returns to real concerns, while the apparently irrational violence of marginalized groups can become a gift to all, reintegrating excluded sectors of the population and excluded practices, such as self-defense, into public life. Global Village. Not long ago, professional football fans who visited certain parts of Africa would notice a surprising number of people wearing shirts advertising teams that had lost the Super Bowl. This was because every year, in preparation for the big game, corporations would print tremendous quantities of shirts for both teams. At the conclusion of the game, the winning team's shirts immediately went on the market, while the other shirts were shipped overseas to the losers, globally speaking, presumably as a tax write-off. When the capitalist village is globalized, the wrong side of the tracks encompasses entire continents.
For more information about the war in every word, visit crimethinc.com/contradictionary. As this episode goes into production, Argentina and Germany are just about to begin the final match of the 2014 FIFA World Cup. And guess what? We don't give a shit who wins. Because no matter who scores the most goals, the people of Brazil and the exploited and excluded around the world are the real losers in the World Cup. FIFA's colonization of the country has accelerated the impoverishment of the Brazilian people and the expansion of global policing. Soccer is supposed to transcend politics. In fact, this rhetoric is designed to mask the reality of exploitation and misery behind the glossy team colors and pageantry. Let's listen to some of the voices from behind the scenes of the spectacle.
The 2014 FIFA World Cup.
There's been months of unrest in some of the city's favelas or slums, with clashes between police and residents. Here, people demonstrated against Brazil holding the World Cup.
government has spent more than $11 billion getting ready.
There's huge social inequalities in this country, and many people are protesting that while the rich are getting richer, the poor are suffering, and spending billions of dollars on essentially a sporting event, even if it is the biggest on the planet, is not the best use of that money.
We're asking the question, who is this World Cup for? The answer is not for the people of Brazil. So we're against this type of event that excludes the majority of the population.
Well, and they're going to make money as well as the money they're spending.
Actually, FIFA makes the money. This is where the controversy is. The country usually doesn't make money. FIFA, the organisation of the World Cup, is who makes the money. In 2003, the Brazilian government banned alcohol from stadiums because of the enormously high death rate amongst fans.
That seems like a good idea. Potentially life-saving even. The only problem is, Budweiser is one of FIFA's key sponsors. FIFA seemed anxious to protect Budweiser from a law designed to protect people, which is why FIFA's Secretary-General went to Brazil with a simple message.
I'm sorry to say, and maybe I look a bit arrogant, but that's something we'll not negotiate. I mean, there will be, and there must be, as part of the law, the fact that we have the right to sell beer.
South Africa hosted the World Cup 4 years ago. FIFA forced the creation of the FIFA World Cup courts. 2 Zimbabweans who robbed foreign journalists on a Wednesday were arrested on a Thursday and began 15-year jail sentences the next day.
This outrage can only be contained through a massive mobilization of troops. 170,000 military and police are being deployed to secure the games. New laws have granted the military and police special powers to arrest demonstrators. In a country emerging from decades of military dictatorship, FIFA and the World Cup have given the police and armed forces a new reason to flex their muscles.
Eu achei... I'm scared of policemen.
You were scared of the police?
Yes, yeah.
Police have reportedly also used tear gas, rubber bullets, noise bombs to disperse demonstrators. Protest organizers said Brazilians will continue fighting for their rights despite the dangers they face.
Across the city, there's violence, evictions and demolition as Brazil prepares for the Football World Cup and the Olympics.
Right to my right, literally a 5-minute walk from Maracanã Stadium, is a place called Favela do Metro. Favela do Metro was the home of 700 families. Right now it is the home of no families. It has been completely knocked to the ground. All it is now is a couple of storefronts and lots of rubble, rats, waste. I mean, it's an absolute calamity. And the plan was to knock down the favela and build a parking lot. That parking lot has yet to be built.
This is one of the favelas being destroyed.
This was Antonio's home. He was told to vacate just this morning. By the afternoon, this.
The workers themselves, they all lived in favelas. So they were favelados themselves, and they were the people who were hired to actually knock down the favelas and then clear the areas. And we asked them how it felt to be favelados knocking down the favelas of others, and they said, they used a word in Brazilian which does not have an English translation, but they said, it made me feel strange in my heart. About 200 tourists were sitting at an outdoor cafe, and they started to chant for the police, a soccer chant. They started to say, "Oe, oe, oe, policia." And then the police fired tear gas about 1.5 blocks towards the protesters. Yet they got their trajectory wrong, and the tear gas landed just about 100 yards in front of them, and then a headwind blew the tear gas onto the tourists. sending 200 tourists scattering, who were cheering for the police just moments ago, scattering in utter panic.
In this episode, we report on the reality of the World Cup as experienced by those who are suffering from it and resisting it. Here, we share an interview that appeared recently on the CrimeThink blog with Brazilian anarchists who explain the context of the protests and how they relate to the recent upheavals around the country.
What is your analysis of the situation surrounding the World Cup? Why are so many Brazilians opposed to it?
There are many reasons to oppose the World Cup in Brazil. Since 2007, popular committees like the Comitê Popular da Copa have been organizing protests and campaigns against the social costs of the World Cup, with the participation of many anarchists. First of all, 250,000 people have already lost their houses in the cities that will host the games without a fair repayment and under operations reminiscent of what the former Nazi government did with Jews, immigrants, and others. They painted a number on their doors one day and evicted them the next. Those people were forced to sign papers accepting these bad conditions, or else lose everything with no hope of repayment at all. Second, there are thousands of workers who earn a living from informal work on the streets, and they will be forbidden to work inside the FIFA-imposed perimeter during the days of the games. This perimeter extends for 2 miles around the stadiums and the area of the fan fests, where the games will be shown on the streets via giant screens. In addition, prosecution will target those who sell products that FIFA has been given a monopoly over, such as the products of sponsors. The families of 10 workers who died during the construction of the stadiums are also waiting for reparations. Alongside all this, FIFA is imposing a state inside of the Brazilian state. The whole population can see how corruption is increasing with these structures for the mega events, while our lives are being destroyed. In 2007, the government said that no public money would be used, yet we have seen approximately $4 billion spent on infrastructure to host the games. That includes mega stadiums and roads and lots of other buildings that won't even be finished for the games and will not be useful in the future, while hospitals, schools, public transportation, and work remain precarious for most of the population. Strikes are taking place everywhere in a way that we have not seen in a long time, including teachers, students, bus drivers, and subway workers. Nor have the other struggles in Brazil disappeared. The homeless movements, indigenous resistance, the black and women's movements, and LGBT organizations are all getting some attention now, fighting for their rights and intensifying their struggles. The MTST, a big movement for housing in Sao Paulo, organized an occupation with 1,000 families, including those who lost their houses because of the World Cup, near the Itaquera Stadium where the first match will take place. The expected profit for FIFA in Brazil is greater than the last 2 World Cups put together. To ensure this, state repression has increased against social movements and all manifestations of dissent, criminalizing strikes and demonstrations that block the street, persecuting leaders and collectives, attempting to pass anti-terror laws and other oppressive measures. They are using vague terms that leave a great deal of room for interpretation for the courts. For now, nobody knows exactly what is a crime or what can land you in prison during a demonstration or mobilization. During the games, there will be a state of exception in special courts to condemn people. Another $1 billion has been spent on training and weapons to repress demonstrations. Israel is providing training to the police and army and is selling drones and other anti-riot weapons and devices. The military police are being trained by the French police, as well as the former American mercenary company Blackwater, which has changed its name to Academy. Rumors that the huge organized criminal groups in Brazil want to repeat the actions of 2006, when they brought all of Sao Paulo to a halt, are being used to justify these operations. All the police forces and the army are working together in a way we have never seen before. Probably the biggest legacy of the World Cup will be the growth of state apparatuses for governance and repression. These apparatuses will keep this country a perfect place to exploit cheap labor and resources, while a growing economy grants enormous profits to international capital.
Is this struggle against the fare hikes, which took place last summer, related to this struggle against the World Cup? What lessons have been learned, and what are the new obstacles that must be overcome?
Yes, they are related. First, because many of the movements, collectives, and autonomous militants that compose the struggle against the fare hikes are involved directly or indirectly with the uprisings against the World Cup. Second, and maybe most importantly, they are related because they question a project of a society based on the logic of capital. Remember, the fare hikes were attempted in a country that has one of the most expensive public transportation fees in the world, relatively speaking, consuming approximately a third of the average household income, and a very precarious, overcrowded transportation system owned by a small group of businessmen. This is a place where the urban fabric nearly collapsed due to lack of planning, where public space is being hijacked by the private sector, where roads and highways are controlled by the automobile industry, where the distribution of the city's geography is dictated by real estate speculation. In this scenario, the fare increase was much more than 20 cents. The hike would interfere directly in the mobility of people, and, in a city like Sao Paulo, which has 28 million people, it became an issue of depriving the population of basic rights such as school, healthcare, or home ownership. With that context in view, we can see that when an international company such as FIFA puts on a huge enterprise such as the World Cup, the whole country is submitted to the same immiseration as the fare hikes would produce. This is a matter of the privatization of the public sphere with the collaboration of the local government. The World Cup did not just start on June 12th. The World Cup had already started in 2007, when Brazil was officially given the responsibility of hosting this massive capitalist spectacle. From that moment, people were being evicted from their homes in order to build stadiums and infrastructure for the Cup. Workers were having their activities restricted by the government, and so on. This is the reality of the Cup for the poor and the peripheral. These same people are not going to be able to go to the stadium to watch the matches because the cheapest tickets cost more than the monthly minimum wage. In that sense, the Cup is a classist spectacle that the poor are not only unable to see, but that they also must pay for. So these struggles are related, in the sense that they both confront a development project that has no place for the majority of the country's population. And, not by coincidence, they both encounter the very same response from the state, the brutality of its police and army.
The Black Bloc is all over the news again. Are these actions bigger than in previous years? Are there other tactics that have spread in Brazil?
Black Bloc tactics are not really on the news as much right now as they were in the months following the victory against the fare hikes. They are still occurring on the street, albeit on a much smaller scale and without much coordination. But they remain the target of the state in the media. The Black Bloc appears in the news as a threatening organization that is being investigated as a terrorist group. This is probably because the authorities fear that this reaction to and intolerance of state violence can spread. The police are looking for the origins of the Black Blocs, trying to find out who these people are, collecting information about those detained at demonstrations and from others who leave traces on the internet. They are performing a big lawsuit as if the Black Bloc were a national criminal organization. What bullshit. But there are many people who have been introduced to radical thoughts and tactics for the first time through the Black Blocs in last year's demonstrations. Consequently, many of them act without any other anarchist background, as if they were a movement, with official Facebook pages calling demonstrations by themselves. This can facilitate the pigs' work of finding and identifying them. Also, we can see some of them acting as if their tactics are the best on all of the earth, that they should always be used no matter how or when, and not trying to engage in dialogue with the other movements that call for demonstrations. So these people sometimes act in a way that ruins the original plan for a march route, or that exposes others to more risks rather than protecting them, such as barricading other people into the same corner with the police, saving their own asses while others are trapped. Unfortunately, some other movements are avoiding them, and sometimes avoiding everybody with black or black and red flags. This is a moment to rethink the way these tactics should be used. But it is difficult for anarchists to create dialogue with this new generation. Maybe only experience will show us solutions.
Have the uprisings that followed last year's Brazilian protests in Bosnia, in Turkey, once again in Ukraine, Thailand, Taiwan, or anywhere else influenced the struggle against the World Cup? And have the nationalists who caused so much trouble in the movement against the fare hikes returned to the protests in Brazil?
Fortunately, middle-class liberals and nationalists haven't found a reason to come into the streets again. We only saw one attempt to recreate a march for family, God, and property, a reenactment of an event that took place during the dictatorship, but it was a true failure. But it is possible to feel that this tension with nationalists persists. Recent events, including people publicly beating accused thieves or even locking them to posts, and lynchings that have had the support of some journalists and authorities, usually against black and poor people, have showed that Brazil hides a monster that can emerge at any time.
The favelas have been severely affected by the development plans leading up to the World Cup. There have been evictions and raids and some deaths. How have people responded to this repression?
In the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, we've witnessed the most offensive operations since 2009 by the UPPs, the Pacification Police Unit, a project that has the objective of seizing control of the favelas, where the only state institution present is the police. This is like a new conquest of the West, with the excuse of fighting the drug market, in which private capital supports this operation in order to explore the potential of these communities that until now use resources and services beyond the control and taxation of the state. Resistance to these operations has been strong, and these units are always attacked, particularly after the police commit murders. We see this molecularization of organized revolt when these frequent murders are followed by huge riots. In Sao Paulo in January, there was at least one bus burned every day in protests against police brutality or for better life conditions in the poor neighborhoods. This is even taking place in small cities like Pati dos Alferes, where all the police stations were burned and all the police were attacked by crowds after a girl died during an arrest.
What have comrades done outside of the protests and riots? Are there new participants, new spaces, new tools, new meeting points? What do you think comrades can do to build strength through these movements in Brazil?
After the uprisings in Brazil during June 2013, we already knew that other fights were about to take place against the World Cup. So during the rest of the year, we saw radical tactics and also radical organizing taking place in all the struggles in which anarchists could be involved. We witnessed new occupations by the homeless movements, including buildings with hundreds of families. But we didn't obtain any new spaces for anarchist projects, and anarchist squats and social centers are very rare in Brazil. The few that exist are threatened by serious repression. At the same time, some of these spaces and collectives saw a huge groundswell of popular interest, participating in debates, organizing, study groups, and other forms of anarchist activity. It was good to see that people realized that the struggles of 2013 emerged from an anarchist tradition and experiences from the anti-globalization movements of the preceding 15 years. We should return to this question again after this new June, this new winter to come. We will see where we will be after that. But in this moment, it is important to test our abilities and the connections we can make. In this context, being in contact and sharing knowledge and support around the world is very important. Thanks a lot for this conversation. And now we're going to share a feature one of our listeners alerted us to from the excellent blog Dialectical Delinquents, which has been covering the Cup protests in Brazil. In this article, a European situationist-inspired radical reflects on the function of mass sporting events in reinforcing capitalism and the spectacle. It's entitled, "We Have Ways of Making You Happy."
Football, the goal of a goalless world, of a goalless life, the opium of the people. What began a long time ago as a primarily working-class sport played and developed on the street or other unsurveilled places by the poor has now become a method of turning those workers into spectators, controlling those streets and places and making the life of the poor worse. The seemingly endless spectacle of sport has at its base the repression of communities of struggle. In the wake of the repressions of class struggle communities from the mid-'80s up until just a few years ago, football increasingly became the surrogate working-class connection to the world, the participatory compensation and consolation for the repression of these struggles, for the repression of a real connection with history. People pay exorbitant amounts of money to travel to and consume these events in order to say, I was there. And ersatz history mediated by sports heroes and team support clothes, etc. History as commodity. History as conspicuous consumption. But with Brazil, the contradictions of the show are becoming transparent. Sickness and shacks for the poor, health and mansions for the rich. The commodity spectacle has its priorities. An investment in image and diversionary entertainment has become more profitable than the production of the bare necessities. Today, the ruler's present method is a slight variation of the standard bread and circuses method since Roman times, genetically modified crumbs and football played by millionaires. John Dennis, a radical miner during the strikes of the 70s and 80s, said once to me that when he was a teenager, he was a Sheffield Wednesday fan. But he always felt that it was a role he felt obliged to play, to put on a show of joy when the team won, to be sad when they lost. It was something he felt obliged to play as an unwritten rule of his friendship with the other fans. Nowadays, that role, the face painted in national colors that the fan puts on, most obviously supports the terror of FIFA and the Brazilian cops. We know this world is shit, let's just enjoy what it's got to offer, shrugs off critique and critical self-reflection with a conventional mixture of naivete and cynicism. A taxi driver in Fortaleza said on June 16th, there has been some mindless violence with the protests, but now it's time to enjoy soccer. The desire to belong, separated from the struggle for a community against this world, becomes simply a suffocating duty to conform. It's expressed in the form of the fans' exaggerated pretense of brashly affirming what they have been told must be affirmed. Regardless of what people genuinely feel, invent, or initiate, one must keep up appearances. That which appears on Facebook is good. That which is good appears on Facebook. When people dress up in colorful masks and funny clothes and take endless selfies, life and the self has grown old and cannot be rejuvenated with dazzling colors. It can only be evoked as a photo posted on the internet. The greatness of this costume drama increasingly flourishes at the dusk of life and the impending midnight of the planet. This banal display quite consciously supports the positivism that capital tries to turn into an obligation in the face of all this positivism's very evident, miserable, negative consequences. Occupation of the favelas, evictions, gentrification, intensified poverty and sickness, sex tourism, tear gas and bullets, deaths on the construction sites, etc., which the movement of proletariat subversion in Brazil over the last 12 months has made it impossible not to be aware of. We can hardly blame FIFA and the rest of the bourgeoisie for acting in their own brutal class interest. But the spectators who want to remain spectators, the willing collaborators, those complicit in their own misery, these are the cowardly enemy within, always playing safe, always faking it, always avoiding the depths and staying on the surface, always flowing with the tide until it eventually drowns them. The World Cup is a subtler version of the Thai ruling class method of recent hierarchically organized forms of leisure consumption.
Are you in need of a pick-me-up? How about a free haircut or a hot meal? A dance show by women in PVC miniskirts? Perhaps a chance to pet a pony? All this and more is now available to you, courtesy of the Royal Thai Army's Happiness campaign, which is staging free festivals across Bangkok to bring back happiness to the Thai public following last month's military coup. A bizarre combination of an army-controlled street party and music festival, the parties have been taking place in parks and squares where the public is showered with free food and drink and given an opportunity to watch the army sing and dance and take selfies next to trussed-up soldiers. The campaign is by the order of General Prayuth Chan-o-cha, who took control of Thailand 2 weeks ago in a military coup. Prayuth has said that the coup should be celebrated as an opportunity for Thais to feel good after a long stretch of political infighting left the country deeply divided. The Thai people, like me, have probably not been happy for 9 years, he said last month. But since May 22nd, there is happiness.
The goal of the spectacle of the World Cup, as of the leisure spectacle as a whole, is to be seen to be above politics. It insinuates itself into the community of false friendship mediated by what the society has defined as happiness.
There's a predominant climate of fraternization, President Dilma Rousseff told reporters in Brasilia yesterday. Rousseff said the mood shift reminded her of when she watched the 1970 World Cup while imprisoned by Brazil's military dictatorship. The advance of Brazil's national team in that event began winning over fellow inmates who had refused to support the squad because they expected victory would only strengthen the military regime, she said. Brazil's team represents our nationality, she said in an emailed statement yesterday. It is above governments, political parties, and interests of any groups.
Even prisoners under a brutal dictatorship can appreciate the positive value of the nation and football as its ambassador, as long as they give up their silly notion that football strengthens military regimes, and certainly not then to go on recognizing that these militarized regimes can take on both a dictatorial and democratic form. But in being overpowered by the show of football and its ideologies of fraternization, even a prisoner can give up his angry point of view and be turned into the pliable self that enables this society to crush people more easily. Given this extreme fragility, that of each individual's sense of self in a world that destroys all individuality, and the community of solidarity that enables individuals to recognize each other, positive affirmation of situations totally outside of the individual's participation and control becomes a pathological need, a desperate way of connecting with someone, in this case through sport, though cultural mediations are usually just as alienated. The fans try to delude themselves into believing that they are somehow participating in all the decisions by acting like would-be managers of their team. We should put X in Y position and concentrate more on Z, and that bastard Q should have been sacked years ago, blah, blah, blah. They compete with each other by showing off their expertise, learning all the minutiae of the history and gossip of their and their opponents' teams. Community by proxy, a vicarious form of decision-making, the only kind that capital produces, and produces en masse. The more genuine community and the taking of significant decisions it represses. All that frenzied passion and exuberance toward the unpredictable, unrehearsed, unscripted suspense of the game is all focused on the pitch. A mediation totally outside the control of the fans whose eyes never meet. The only game really worth playing is everywhere repressed with distractions, lies, and stun grenades. The unpredictable, unrehearsed, unscripted suspense of the revolutionary adventure.
You can read more coverage and analysis at dialectical-delinquents.com. The final whistle may have blown, but the World Cup is not over. The people of Brazil will continue to feel the impacts of the entire miserable spectacle for many years to come. The destroyed homes of the favelas are not coming back. Protesters snatched under special laws will face years of legal ordeals or prison time. The police and military will continue to use their training and weapons to brutalize the population. And the decaying infrastructure of health, transportation, housing, and education will continue to get worse as the sparkling stadiums slowly rot with disuse. And the ordeal of the mega events is not over yet. The 2016 Olympics are just around the corner, which will certainly result in another round of repression, displacement, and impoverishment. But Brazilians aren't giving up. We'll keep you posted on the social movements and anarchist struggles there as they continue to develop. And remember, FIFA is an international organization with a global reach. No matter where you're listening, you can take actions to interrupt the mass sports spectacle, to strike back against the exploitation and greed that led to this nightmare. No matter who wins, all of us can struggle against the nationalisms that claim to speak for us, the patriarchal values that focus attention only on men and their games, and the capitalist economy that reduces all of our lives to units of exchange. And the stakes of these struggles are higher than any soccer game. Let's play to win.